Ang kasi Gibu chungda tumbe lam yirin bala lo chang, dene gibu tingda tumama rim yirin bala lo chang, dene jam nye che chancho sem kom che, an chancho sem ki, ane gibu chimbe lam yirin bala lo chang ores. Ne chancho sem ki ne, dene chancho sem pege tomba song, ane chancho sem pe cheba paro chimba la go ores. Odu sin di nyamnen, dene ki nyamnen che ne, di che liya, ane tumama yinpa sa, 도시 태평 아리아 냠는 제고레스 지나 도시는 냠는 지는 저게 산지고 보토야래 도시는 냠는 지는 바로스 마선 디스제고레 디네기린 바디 아니 조지기 람런나로 송바나 진진한 람런 치마나 도시는 마 안티고 송고요래 해지나 그 생각도 뒤고 쉬로하다.
Good evening. So last week we continued looking at how we need to train our minds in a particular sequence. So first we need to train our mind in the practices which are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity. And with that as a foundation, we build into the trainings of a practitioner of intermediate capacity. And then we have the required foundation to engage in the trainings of a practitioner of supreme capacity. With those trainings, one cultivates and generates bodhicitta. And having generated bodhicitta, one then makes the vow of a bodhisattva and thereafter engages in the practices of a bodhisattva. And finally, then one has is fully qualified to engage in the stages of training of secret mantra. And this presentation of the Lamrim is in faithful concordance with its foundational text, that of Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment.
In Mashia, under that Lamrim Mason, the work you would tomorrow Lam Yirin Bas, or the native would tune the tomorrow Mirba Lojang, the net give Chimbelam Yirin Lojang or yes, and Dustine, a song Rora. The names are that in Ma and Diku. In that the two would be Gumsen Song over the Gumsen Mad in the Ashura.
So we'll continue from where we concluded last week. So as part of the text we're looking at is presenting the the trainings in accordance with beings of varying capacities, the correct sequence of trainings. And so that has been presented. Now we come to the very purpose of it. So that's where we'll start at the handout, the bottom of page 84, and in the published book in the middle, page 73.
Nibanis, Galde Kivu Chungjingi, Chokornam, Kivu Chimbi, Monroina, Kivu Chimbi, Lamrim Jebe, Chomes, Kivu Chungjing da Tumovi, Lamrim Shi, Tani Jijaku Shenas.
It starts with a question. If the Dharma teachings of persons of lesser and medium capacity are the preliminary practices of persons of great capacity, it should indeed be acceptable to consider them the stages of the path of persons of great capacity. So why use the phrase, the stages of the path in common with persons of lesser and medium capacity?
Lobsang Dorje, that Gibu Chungu Lam Yirin Bat, and Boy Gibu Chungu Lam Yirin Bat, the Netting Lam Yirin Badi, and Dingy, and the Gibu Chimbi Lam Yirin Bat Chapal, Wondres, nearly a Dinyam Solengo, Wondres in the Gibu Chungu Tumo Lam Yirin Bat, and Gibu Rino Tumo Lam Yirin Badi, Gibu Chimbi, Tabachimbi, Shenyam Chapa, Wondres, Sonwada. Since Wondres on that this were Galde Gibu Chungjingi, Chokor Nam, Gibu Chimbi, Wondro in us, and Wondro in and Delia and Gibu Chimbi Lamirin Bas, Jene Lapshan, Tigduas, Jizna de Gibu Chumu to Malamirimba, Tingela Mirimbala, Minuasan, Gibu Chimbi Lamirin Bas, Sungalia and Jiglia Ming, and Gibu Chimbi Lamirin Bas, Lapshan, Tigduas, or that Diwaruch, to us and that Jigdusene.
The first point is made in the first part of the question. If if the Dharma teachings of persons of less and medium capacity are the preliminary practices of persons of great capacity. So this is a key point that has been presented thus far. So just to remind us, in order to fulfill one's aspiration to enter into the trainings of a bodhisattva, one has to engage in the preliminary practices, and those are the trainings of a practitioner of initial and intermediate capacity. Then the question comes further. As that is the case, it should indeed be acceptable to consider them the stages of the person of great capacity. So in other words, why go to this trouble of dividing the stages of training in accordance with beings of three varying capacities? Why not just call it the stages of training of a being of great capacity and include the entirety of them just under that one title?
Dine kiwu chimpe lam yirin ba labna jigidu was garjene ene kiwu chumyo da chumyo lam yirin tumo lam yirin ba kiwu tingda tumo lam yirin ba andu shene garjene lagwa res lagwa ya kimsan kare sa jo jigu tanye jija go ne tanye de chik de ne pechi dang go kare res so rada.
And then the question is explicitly made in the final sentence. So why use the phrase, the stages of the path in common with persons of lesser and medium capacity?
That Mondo in Zada, and Delia Chunda, Tumolam Yiriba, Dina, Tumolam Yiriba, Malabache, and one who go on to be Chidu, Gewachima, one do go on to be Chidu, that Jimba the Surin Yamnaje, that give Chum Tumalam Yiriba, Yamnajanara, Din Yamnajin, give a Chimbulam Yirimba, Yamnaj, Delachi, you can give a Chimbulam Yang, Lojan Chigu, Lamnajig was order, then give one do go on to be Chidu, and Yamne Lam Yamne Chidu, and Don't give Chimbelam Rimalo Jangu, Yamna Chigu, Lamna, Jigirovas. Then Carson D. give Chimbelam Yungun Yamnajas or Dinaji, and comes on Kuru Dungan, Tamjel, Treje, Tarba Toku, Sempi, Ditoba, Tarba doing Yamna Jigabler, and give Chimbelam Yirimba Yamna Jigu, Lamna Jiguas. Carson D. give Chimbelam Yirimba, Wonderovas, Dilagor, Dandala, Najere give one do go on to be Lam Yirimba Yamna Chidu. And give Chimbelam Yirba Yamna Chigu. Then give Drina Tumo Lam Yirimba Yamna Chidune, the Casore, give Chimbelam Yirba Chigu, Yamna Chigu Lamna, Digidu was. Carson Dini give Chimbelam Yirimba, Wonder was.
So the question is, I understand then, from what has been presented, that the practices which are shared with, is it shared? Yeah, or in common with or shared with practitioners of initial and intermediate capacity are considered the indispensable preliminary practices in order to become a practitioner of great capacity. So then, why don't we just exclude this threefold division and take the entirety of the trainings and just give it one title. Call it the trainings of a practitioner of great capacity. So those which are now currently, as per the Lamrim, are designated as training shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, which are those striving to attain a good rebirth or higher states in our next life. Why don't we just call that trainings for a practitioner of great capacity? And then there is no need to mention trainings which are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity. And similarly, the second part of the preliminaries, those that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, which are focused on the attainment of liberation from samsara. Why don't we also call those trainings for a practitioner of great capacity? And then here too, there'll be no need to talk about trainings shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. So do away with those two classifications, training shared with the practitioner of initial and intermediate capacity. Do away with those two divisions and call both of those preliminaries as the same as the main body and call it all together trainings of a practitioner of great capacity. Shouldn't we just do that?
결혼 가린 냠는 지기를 옹아 기부 중원다 투모에 남기는 발로 장기에 냠는 지기를 내기로 봐도 뭐 태바침에 주에 냠는 지기를 내기 말와 제사 디 태바침에 주에 냠는 지기를 남는 지기도 와가선 디 태바침에 온도 냠는 온도로 와래거든 디나신 안에 감정 코르의 동화 타다를 줘야지 다 지금 심지어 탐제 감정 코르의 동화 타라데 맞은 탐 감정 코르의 동화 타다 줘고다 선배게다 당보 코르의 동화 코르의 동화들 맞은 탑 민도 선배라니 다 되는 게 줘고 선배게 탈바 토고 선배 삼는 장비갑라 아니 대 안에 기부 중인다 투모와 남기로 장구 유에스 라그리마도 태바침이 주냐면 지기 라그 말와 제사디 투모와 남기는 이자도 태바침이 주냐면 제 라금 누아스 진짜 태바침이 주냐면 지기 라는 지기도 와고 가서 태바침이 주냐면 원주를 와스 제사 원주에 자디 두신에 태바침이 주냐면 지기 랍시나 지기도 와세다 또 똑바로 시티 송거다 꼭 똑바로 시티 와서 똑바로 뛰고 거래
This questioner understands that this questioner has the aspiration to enter into the paths of the Mahayana. They want to be cultivating love and compassion into the arisal of actual bodhicitta. This is the aspiration. And they understand that this is a process that will take lifetimes. Therefore, they need to gain excellent rebirths, a continuity of excellent rebirths. And therefore, they need to ensure that they're training in ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance in order to achieve an excellent rebirth. So this is understood. But their question is, so when I'm engaging in those trainings in order to gain an excellent rebirth, in order to eventually enter into the actual trainings of a practitioner of great capacity, why is it that I have to call these trainings those shared or in common with a practitioner of initial capacity? Why can't I just call them trainings of the Mahayana Dharma? Why can't I, or just trainings of the Mahayana? Why can't I just call them that? Because I am engaged in the preliminaries for the Mahayana. Similarly, when I'm training in the practices which are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, whilst these are the preliminaries to engage in the Mahayana, why can I not just call them I'm engaging in practices of the Mahayana? Because I am, in effect, engaging in the preliminaries of the Mahayana. But it's being stated that I have to actually call them trainings which are shared or in common with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. Why can't I just call them practices of the Mahayana? Because they are the preliminaries to the Mahayana. So this is the essence of the question.
뇌셔르다 지성고르체 디수파 직파장 람상 당보는 레어는 칼랑문에 소에 레고 말와 당보디파 니마 가시고 뛰와 주고야 되게 주상하다 이렇게 봐들 직제 띵원으로와 제가 당원이랑 또 니마 칼라 소에 띵원에도 무시 원도 들어와 원이 들어와다 무시 디파 나나 체 num로야 당고 직제도 딱 고조에도 칼라 소에 무시도 고 장거로와 디니엘에 안지 잘라디 고고에서 된데 주야다 된 마트 자야디게 좀 칼라 무시 자야디 무시디 원로 전거로 봐. 무시디 전거 말어. 이내 아주 지선하려야디 원로디 자비 값는데 무시디 전거 말때 이내 저 가르쳐 갔으니까 칼라서 마신 전거라 이러 봐. 마등 원로 전거 칼라서 무시 전거 새끼 켜 마셔봐지. 내가 칼라서야디 칼라서야 전거라 이러 봐. 제가 디 원로데 장원의 고주요도는 칼라서야 전거라 이러 봐. 어디나 신스고다. 그 삼로디 고고라. 제가 디나시 태바 준비 최념면 원로 자도네 태바 준비 최념의 지위 람들이기도 와서 월다 너나들이.
So this would be like someone who's studying to be a chef, perhaps with a speciality in a particularly advanced form of cooking. When they start their course, the first series of lessons is not going to be on how to make this advanced dish. It's going to start with the preliminaries, with the basics. What tools the chef uses, implements the chef uses, what are the right ingredients, and so forth. So that will be the initial classes. And only when those skills have been gained, and perhaps some others, will they be ready to be shown how to make this more advanced dish. But this person, when asked, oh, what are you doing with your time? They may well say, oh, I'm studying to be a chef. They're not going to necessarily say, well, I'm learning the basics so that I can become a chef. They may just want to talk more generally and say, I'm studying to be a chef. So this is the similar concept to this question.
bene tarbada tamje kimbe gowa tobala tin ludi ngonde gowa tin gugure 제가 tin dele ne nga son ke ba ne dene ge nyamne je ko bra ge mare 제가 da tin za da ke wa chimai ne ngonde gowa tobudu samje dene ge ngonde gowa tobe chudo nyamle rimba dela da 기부 충원의 투모와 남이 림바 라비야다 dene ge tanye daya da dene ne 고용 가서 동안에 타다를 줘야지 타바 토고 선비게 삼로 장외 갑라 기부진의 투모와 남이 림바 데네기 민 타니 따야 될 고바 김제 요래스 제나디 김제 요래스 와다디 김제 고바데 김제 요래스 와다 데 시글로요 말다 고바 김제 요래스 와다 민 따오 고비 고바에 김제 요래스.
So that then is the question. So before we come to look at the answer, just to repeat this. So here there is no debate about the preliminaries that are indispensable, the cultivation of the causes to ensure a continuity of excellent rebirths, and on that basis, the developing a determination to gain liberation from the sufferings of samsara. So there's no question that these preliminaries are required to be cultivated within in order to actually give rise, to actually engage in the trainings of the Mahayana.
다디 마직되는 말에 기부 소소를 제대 치발라 고바 침보 니에데스 제자다 람네 치발라 데네게 냠네 이름도 두신 치요도 치오데 고바 침보 니에데스 내가 니요레스 가리어스나 디더 기부 충 징다 투모베게 로마장바 로마게바 양 라니 기부 침보 케체베게 나제 셴바당 로랍딩 타숨 숨라 팬 채와 오스 다디 김전에 숨어로
So now we start to look at the answer. There are two major purposes for making the divisions into three levels of beings and guiding them accordingly. First, it undermines the conceit of someone who, without even having given rise to the mental attitudes common to persons of lesser and medium capacity, claims to be a person of great capacity. That's Samaso. And second, there is the following great benefits in their threefold categorization as the highest, intermediate, and lowest mental states.
denma gibu sum soso dangbo gibu jingna tumo teba chimbe chue nyamlen cheba dangbo ta teba chimbe chue nyamlen chi maji ma chiba ji dangbo ne gibu jingda chungu da tumo lam yirin bala ba lo jang ju di yabo cha ne deni gibu jingda tumo wan lam yirin ba lo jang deni yabo cha ne deni gibu chimbe lam yirin ba lo jang du sin rinba de jang go ba de ne gyu go ba yo re go ba chimbo ni yo re la re ta go ba chimbo deni ni yo ba na ga re la na da di dangbo de so re 기부 진다 투모베 로 마제바 양 라니 기부 첨보 케체웨 가져 좀 바래스 제가 가시에다 지기 기부 중원의 진다 로균의 마장 바제 예수균의 내수를 검나로 제 한모고 마신 와지 되는 아타가 침비 쉬냐면 중한테 진 아타가 침비 쉬냐면 제 가제 기팅하라 되는 용거로 와다 오 되게 기대요나 제가 당보다 기부 충분 진다 투모람로 장고고래 되는 기부 진다 투모람로 장고래 되는 지젤 기부 침발람이로 장고래 세대 당아 타바 침에 취냐면 기부 충분다 진다게 냠는 맞아 봐서디 니네스 마신 봐서 오 당아 타바 침에 취냐면 지긴 세대 따다 지기면 무슨 베게 당아게 맞아로 그래 세네
There are two major purposes for making this division to the three levels of beings and guiding them accordingly. So just to reiterate, the three levels of beings refers to that one initially needs to generate the realizations associated with a practitioner of initial capacity. On that basis, one develops, emphasizes in one's meditation the trainings that are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. And when those are also generated within one's continuum, then one is ready now to emphasize in one's meditation the trainings which are unique or uncommon to practitioners of great capacity. So these are the three levels that one is guided in. So now to these two major reasons or purposes. First, it undermines the conceit of someone who, without even having given rise to the mental attitudes common to persons of lesser and medium capacity, claims to be a person of great capacity. So this then is a person who has not trained in those two initial stages. And by not trained means that they haven't given rise to those determinations, the determination or the marks of having completed their training. These haven't, or the signs rather, that these haven't been attained within. So such a person, without having done that, says, "No, I'm a practitioner of great capacity, or I'm engaging in the practices of a person of great capacity." This would be a sign of pride or conceit, and so therefore the first reason for presenting it in the way that is presented here is so that someone can identify more clearly to themselves where their capacity is and not be self-deluded by their own conceit.
예, 되는 거를 먼저 조셉 나디와 미가 레스기 승보르드네 지 엔지기 친구 엔지기 자다 되게 자가기 자기도 자고르다 조셉한테 자가기 엔지기 신경 말아 자고 그러면서 시우신도 다시 자고但미 엔지 신경다 된로도 기시시세요 말씀 가시기라서 건축이 엔지기라면 엔지기 자고면 들어가서 그런 신경 말아 되네 되게 제가 소소게 다 직대 다 마다 봐도 신교의 신교의 삼제 제직미 지금 나 신교의 현서 신교 말씀 나야지는 지게 지그레스 저거 와드는 진행 원이라 지금 마다 받아 don다 미원이 신행 지경 기시도 시에메르 와다 제가 진행 용거로
So this would be like in a village, some young person studying English and Hindi, and then bragging to everyone, "Oh, my English is so excellent, and my Hindi is fluent." And all of them, what do they know? They don't speak English or Hindi, they just speak Tibetan, so that they'd be very impressed with this young person. But really, the person knows nothing more than a few words and a few phrases, but whilst that's more than everyone else, they really are very far from fluent.
디나진 로아데 베네가 저기다 타바침베 최데 냠내진데 야고요라 잠니지 공고라서 지마 야 지체라 되스퇴데 소소저기다 되스 다 심잔 대화데 템바동아 밀치 잠제 삼당으로서데 삼다이 마고요데 소소데네 되스 삼다이다 되스 삼다이데 다 소소라 나송의 둥알에 타신 먼저고 방 토고도 심별로야 되네게 나송의 둥알에 타지게 삼바가야 메디게 코의 둥알에 타고 심별 타지게 삼바 메데 메바체 아니 어다네 심잔에 대화데 템바다 잠 니조 공부해서 다 지금 공부에 좀 니조 공부 빼야고라서 해야다 되는 연구로 나데네게 타바치면 칠 빼야고 다데 잔다디게 다다 지게 직접 맞으나 그 중화돼 섬지 빼네 년도에 나라한테다 되네게다 도시에 삼다변에 타바치면 아주니 아 타바치면 주님네 지고다 잠재 공부 니지 공부해서 되는 연구로와 제가 코로나 수술하는 코로나 지구 지구에 선거할 때 이내 디 잠니지가 똑같이 투여하게 갈래 하고 책을 봐. 그래서 원도 코로나데 마저도 당보야 우마시나 되는게 연구 말와 되네 참 되니게 수술하는 게 되네 야고 장고에 타바치면 냠네 지구에서 베게 야고시고 지구에서 막 아기로 깨지 밀려 지 견제다 되네 삼단의 통중 다야로 요르와 되네 가제겐 되네나 제사 되네가 람림 로제 당보 다기고 중원다 tum바람 이름 바 로자 되네 야고지는 원도 고마 동이 tum바게 되네는 고위행아서 동아 타다데 자고서 배 타바동에 삼바게 디제도 디 타바동에 삼바디 랑의 장비게 냠용을 토네 아니 현심제 탐지 디기대 템바도 동아도 자고도 선배도 지는 삼다제된 자주 선배 타바치면 주님이 제고래서 진이 송요도 니 니수도 하고요도 오다딩이디 다기고 중요람 이름 바 tum바람 이름 바다 예 장면도 예 하고 면도 기우진의 투모람 이름 바 소소를 냠용 가야 하고 면도 땅에디 기부 침별람 인가 빼지 밀야 시고 지구에서는 제게 나게 해야되다 다 팀도 와서 아니디 다다 차기면 세비 망아야 자기 자고래서 세상 거바 찍디래서 오는 아야 자야게 거바 요래서
This illustration then we can apply to ourselves in the context of our own actual capacity. So we all have an aspiration to the Mahayana, we have an interest in the Mahayana, we have imprints that draw us to the Mahayana. And when we have heard teachings of the Mahayana, we've reflected on them, our minds have opened and the aspiration has arisen to be counted amongst bodhisattvas, to have the kind of meaningful, beneficial impacts on the world that bodhisattvas do have. So this arises within us, and followed by these emotions, we want to engage in the Mahayana. We place our energy and our emphasis there. But the problem is, we haven't cultivated the preliminaries. We haven't trained yet in the preliminaries. This means we are trying to engage in the trainings of the Mahayana, but we are still pursuing the concerns of this life, still pursuing this life's pleasures and delights, still getting stirred up by this life's problems and frustrations. Moreover, we have no deep yearning, burning desire to gain freedom from the suffering realms of samsara. So therefore, we are very clearly lacking the preliminaries to engage in the Mahayana, and we may well have pride, we may well look down on those who are striving in the beginner meditations, those associated or those shared with practitioners of initial intermediate capacity, those who are meditating on impermanence, for example. But in reality, we will not be able to enter into the Mahayana, actually enter into the Mahayana, as long as we have not successfully trained in the preliminary practices. But on the other hand, if we do apply ourselves to training in the preliminaries, with a focus first on the trainings associated with attaining higher states or excellent rebirths, and then based on that, having the focus of our practice on cultivating definite emergence, this determination to gain liberation from the suffering realms of samsara. With those preliminaries well cultivated, we then are ready to actually generate bodhicitta, to engage in the trainings to generate bodhicitta, because we will have an understanding of why beings suffer and what can be done about it. And we can easily then apply our own experience for meditation to the lived experience of others, and we will be able to enter into the Mahayana. But continuing to say, I'm a practitioner of the Mahayana, without having done the preliminaries, this is just an expression of pride. So this then is the first reason why the teachings are presented into these three sets of trainings, first two, which are shared or in common with practitioners of initial and intermediate capacity.
koyo dunga le dredege samla yabo puidabo kituku mara ninji kituku marwa ninje magena na lasanam da kituku di magena jansim kituku marwa 제사데 두고 마데 소소게 jansimba mare 태바치마 가자 마인 마레데 이나 소소라게 다 띵하 태바치 베냐면 인가 태바치 뭐 인세 케체와세는 마인 버지레 인버 그런 게 네 죄슈 인섬 되야 되라 케체와시 거라 케체와라데
Without having trained in the preliminaries, one will not be able to generate compassion, because to generate compassion requires a powerful, focused, determined attitude. To have that kind of determination, one cannot be pursuing this life's pleasures and be disturbed and perturbed by this life's problems. Moreover, one needs to have given rise to a burning determination, a fire within, to let go of all that causes pain, to see the afflictions as our true enemy and be determined never to be swayed by them and to be striving to cultivate minds of virtue. This is required in order to have the strength of mind, the determination and focus to actually generate compassion. Without this, stating that we are a Mahayanist really is an expression of conceit. And as the text says, in the end of the sentence, one will be claiming to be a person of great capacity when one has not engaged in the cultivation of those preliminaries. So the English is a bit broken up, but the meaning is perfect. It undermines the conceit. So this is this conceit of claiming to be a person that one is not, or to be a level of practitioner that one is not.
나직세 단이 바딜람 제보 안내팅 rabting 타숨 편연체와레스 편연체변 반도체요레스 오래 제보 당보 투모람 이름 바장주 되게 딩게람 되게 침몰람 이름도 자 편연체요레스 다 첼루니에서 다 편연체루데 체당 간스레라나 첼루니 제보 고마니랑 원도당 탈바되니로 괴베 안에 지워를 제외 가사 치링이라양 디니게 삼바 종화 덴바 균도 미규신 연된 기비 치르스
Then the second reason, there is the following great benefits in their threefold categorization as the highest, intermediate, and lowest mental states. Since the two more advanced beings also need to strive for higher states and for liberation, there is no problem with teaching great or intermediate disciples how to train in those two levels of contemplation, because this will give rise to excellent qualities. So this then is the second reason.
데라 디네게 첼루니자 다 기부 고마니 랑 문도당 탈바 되니를 괴배해서 제사 기부 고마니랑 이제 얘도 건 맞지 첼루니 세도와 근데 기부 고마니랑 소로 지주 고마니 세도 기부 고마디 다 니시르 디레 가소레 타바토니 로장 기부 징기를 남겨로 장간체 안에 지금마지데 안에 타바침비기 안에 냠랭이 바체디 기부 고마니스 기부 첨보다 기부 징니디 세월 세상 기부 징기 냠랭 체발라야 원도 고반도니 원도 고반 도니 좀 고고레스 안에 기부 첨보 람미름 냠랭 체발라 원도 고반 도니 좀 고고르 와서다 데레 고만이랑 원도당 세대 원도 고반 도니 좀 고고레지레
So looking in a little more detail. Second, there is the following great benefits in their threefold categorization as the highest, intermediate, and lowest mental attitudes. Since the two more advanced beings, so the two more advanced beings refers to the practitioners of intermediate and great capacity, since the two more advanced beings also need to strive for higher states or excellent rebirths and for liberation. So again, here the two more advanced beings refers to intermediate and great capacity beings.
토발라 개와치말 기부 투모 그래서 기부 총 투모라 미림바 냠내 제발라 개와치만 원도 고만 돈이 좀 고고와 디조디 돈이 좀 받체 대 돈이 제 디에는 돈이 디 르심비 토네 아니 기부치만 원도 고만 토에 귤이야 로전 제고고와 제사다 고만이랑 시당 시디 지난 기부치모 투모라 미림바 냠 제발라 기부치만 원도 고만 돈이 좀 고바 고부도와 마세 델로 고바 마세 기부 등기 냠내 제바데라야 투마람 이름바 냠내 제바데야 먼저 고만동이 좀 고고래 기부 챔비기 타바 챔비 추 냠내 제바이네야 먼저 고만동이 좀 고고래 해서 니가 고고래 해서 그러다 앙세아디게.
So we see here then, again reading the same part again, since the two more advanced beings also need to strive for higher states and for liberation. So both practitioners of intermediate and great capacity need to be striving for the excellent rebirths and for liberation from the suffering realms of samsara. Both need to be striving for these goals.
다 원래 원도 당신 다 타바도니네 괴베서 타바도니 세디 다티 식다하라도 원도 당 세도와 데네 타바도니 세도와 괴베 세조와 타바도니 괴베 세디 기부 진다 투모에 남이르로 장와라 타바도니 로고 고고 바마세 기부 챔비에 남이르로 장와라 타바도니 로 고고래 해지래.
So where we have here is two more advanced beings. So again, this refers to the beings of intermediate and great capacity. So a practitioner of intermediate capacity is striving for their own individual liberation. A practitioner of intermediate capacity is striving for liberation from samsara. And this needs to, and we see here, they also need to be striving to ensure they attain higher states. Likewise, a practitioner of great capacity is also striving for higher states and for liberation. So therefore, we see here that practitioners of intermediate capacity are also striving for the goal of higher states, and a practitioner of great capacity is striving for both of the lower goals of higher states and liberation as well.
디네스 고고여 봐자데 자 기부 충고다 증다 투모 첨부에 남겨 수익념내 제배나 먼저 고방 돈이 좀 받을 거 지바지 차상 고고래 봐. 제사다 디고원자 디버의 제비에 간사 체린이랑 아니 디버 제비에 간사 체린이랑 디니게 삼바 종화 땜바 규매도 규신 연된 기비치를 제사 디고원자 당보 Tiwar Javi Gansa, Chering Nila, Kibu Tinda Tumo Lam Lochawa, and Kibu Chimba Lam Lochawa Della, Chesang, Manzuya, Dambo, Nijas, Kibu Dingi Lam Locha, Denicaso, Denia Tabachimba Lam Loche, and Yamnatiege, Gansa della Church, Sunsa Gansa della, and Dinilaya, and Chisati, Kibu Caso, Window go to be Chido, and Lamgulo Jana, and Payores, Gio Malesio, Payor, Carson, Kibu Dingi Capso Yamli Jibadon, Tarbon window go on doing it Dumbo Kugore, Kibu Chimbel and Yamlin Jibek window go on doing it Dumbo Kugorwa, Chesaniel, one do go on Yamlin Yamlin Chabana, Dijelaya, and Munducaso Kibu Dinda Tumola Mirabal, Yamlechi, one do go on Yamlechi, near Chancellor with the Digos Jango Yamar, just some Don Lamsan. Near Chance Harvard, near Mana Sabat and Jango Lamsan, Jan Nubaki Urwa, Cesari, Deneza, Dinelia, Deneza, Nigal Goenza, Dinige Samba Jonwa, Temba Gyoma, Conila Dambo, Kibu Tinda, Tumo Lamir, Lomajan Yelia, Kibu Chunga, Tumo Lamir, Lojanjuada, Kibu Chimbu Lamir, Lomajan Yela, Kibu Chung Lamir, Lojanju, one do go about to which Yamli Jeju Badil, Gyomares, Gyomeva Maze, you pay your rest, you ending. From
what we've seen thus far in the sentence is that all three types of practitioners need to be striving for the goal of excellent rebirths. So it's most obviously clear for the practitioner of initial capacity. They need to have let go of the desires and of this life, or the troubles of this life, and be striving for a good rebirth. But so too, the practitioner is striving for liberation, and so too for the practitioner striving for Buddhahood. And then the attainment of striving for the qualities of liberation are required for practitioners both of intermediate and great capacity. Then the sentence continues. There is no problem or fault with teaching great or intermediate disciples how to train in those two levels of contemplation, because this will give rise to excellent qualities. So in other words, the practitioner of intermediate capacity, if they are trained in the foundational trainings, those of the practitioner of initial capacity, and similarly, the practitioner of great capacity, if they trained in their foundational or preliminary practices, those associated with intermediate and initial, there is no fault. There will be no delay. There will be no harm. In fact, the opposite will happen. Only benefit will follow from someone who is striving for individual liberation, training in their preliminaries, and likewise a practitioner of great capacity training in their preliminaries. Only benefit, no faults will follow.
And in my Gansa Tamashi Inani, Goma ne Jangjang, Samba Goma Mikilas, Oma Dorwe, and Gaya Mikiwich Rose.
The text continues. However, if a lesser being begins training with the more advanced levels, the more advanced attitudes will not arise. And since they have neglected the lower levels, nothing at all will arise.
Isn't that Gansa Tamachi Nasio? Then Gansa Tamaladu, Yamlin Jihan Dangbo of Shimbaina, the Yawangamativa, Gibuchimi, Chungu, Lamjirimbalia, Lo Changje, the Niki, Lo Topacula Giva, in an end, so give a Tamachago Marwa, give a Tamasidu, that Dangboni Giva Chima, Yawangama in there, and Gibuchunga Lamjirimba, Lo Changje, Mondio Govan, Donu, Dumbaki, Gibuchunga Lamjirimba, Gimebachina, give a Tamache. Just a Diniki Gimekan Gansa Della, give a Tama Dinishi Tamache. Dini Gansa Chilia, Dambone, Gibuchunga Lamjirimba, Lo Jamba, Ansung, Dunga, Mondio Govan, Totogil, Jimba, Susan, Palo, Jama, Jubache, Dambo Corone, and Tarvatoya go Church Shabata, and Anna Tabachimbi, Church, and you send Yamnaja or Den Shebaina, to Chutimbaina. Is that Gansa Diniki Tamashi, Gomane Jangja, so Goma, the Gibuchunga, the Tumo, Lamjirimba, Lord, Gune Machawa, Yella, Gibu Dinda, Tumo, Lamir, Lo Javainada, then give Chimbugi, Tabachimba, Lamir, Lojan Jevaina, the Jangjang, Samba Goma Miki. Jeza, Deniki Kibu Ding the Tumo, Samba Logune, Majama Chila, Dabon Kibu Ding, you got church, Yamna Jejuban, Kibu Ding the Tumo, Lamiriba, Guliki Mareshe, Kibu Chimba Lamiriba, Kitu Mareshe, Miki, Jezan, Gansa, Tamashi, Ina, Gomane, Jang, 고 타마 기부 충을 tum별람이 로마자마지 기부 중의 투모말람이 로장바이네 디기 말레스 안디레 강 기부 챔별람이 로자바이네 디기 말레스 가사 타마세네 기부 충별람이 로자죠 또바 귤리마기 하 모건지서 그래 그 당본 균에 하 모건지래 거라고 지난 딜레 담보하시 기부 타마시 그러다 가서 타마시도 지자다 니네 장니 기부 충별람 이름바 파자 기와 치마 등이 뭐 장로 기와 누구 되시 할 신바르와 지자 니네 타마지래 담보 나송을 동안에 타도게 기부 타고 선배 삼는 균에 매게 지리야 아니 지금 감수의 동안을 저거에서 배 타바도에 남템 바이나 디고 남디 균에 계속 말해지래
However, if a lesser being begins training with the more advanced levels, the more advanced attitudes will not arise. And since they have neglected the lower levels, nothing at all will arise. So here, a lesser being refers to those who have not given rise to the trainings of a practitioner of initial capacity, not even that. So if they do not start at those trainings, in other words, reflecting on death and impermanence, the suffering of the lower realms, the suffering of the higher realms, and so forth. If they don't reflect on that, but immediately go to what draws them, what interests them, perhaps the trainings associated with liberation, or the trainings associated with bodhicitta, nothing will come of that, because they haven't trained in those preliminaries. They haven't developed a foundation. Whereas if they start where they are, then they will progress.
지난해 지바로와 당번에 그 인지균의 자만형들 당번에 에비슨도 장고로 되네기 대수균의 말라와지 전에 당번이 숨바시바기 뎁치파 라베나 되네 신야 갈래 하고 차기로와 언두시 디나지 최고로 디나지래다 차기래 지래 진짜 오만 노르베스요다 나 되네기 냠는 지뒤갑라 이 기부 충분다 투모람이를 물로 균에 마찬가지 당번에 기부 등기 투모람이로 잡아이나 한 오마 돌베스 기부 충분람이를 물로 장고 말다 또 마찬가지 기부 충분람이를 바디 냠는기 똑바 귤에 기그 말 와지래 냠 가야 미기베스 오마 돌베 가야 미기베 미기오 세대자 오마 돌베 기부 충분람이를 바들로 균에 장요 말에 나디 마찬가지 강마라 자도 강매 똑바네 기투고 말에 마게와자다 가야 기고 거연된 기그 말 와서 기부 징다 집에 남지림바 귤에 기투고 말에 되네 오메기 원디고 뭐 토비치도 남냠리를 봐 맞아봐서 니야 제투고 말다 맞아봐래 제사다 원디고 뭐 토비게 남냠리를 봐 기고 말에 아니 탈바다 탐지 김고 뭐 토비 남냠리를 봐 기투고 말에 제사 가야 미기웨 가야 기 말에 제사 가야 미기웨 치로스
We can understand this so clearly with someone who's wanting to learn a language that's completely new. So someone, say, wanting to learn English, they need to first know the alphabet. If they don't know the alphabet, how can they start with the second class when they haven't, or the second level, when they haven't got those foundations right yet? It will not go well. Even if they try really hard, it will not go well. Same too here. And the text says it very clearly. Since they have neglected the lower levels, nothing at all will arise. So this really is pointing out that if someone puts some efforts into following what they're drawn towards, what they like, but not training in the way that is advised, in other words, first in the preliminaries, even if they put great effort in, they will not give rise to good qualities. They will not, if they're striving, say, to develop bodhicitta, despite all their efforts, they will not develop bodhicitta because they haven't trained sufficiently first in the preliminaries.
제사들의 가사 타마시 있나라면 제사 타마시 있나라도 가르고 거선 디슈라 가르고 거선 냐마 기부 충의 남기린 벌로 장제 냠용 여대 버시나 다데 파자도가 기부 ting이 남기린 버장나 디고레서 다데 인지미 당번에 기부 충의 침별 남기린 바바 장모가 제 기부 ting이 남기린 바 자베네 그래서 기부 충의 남기린 바 장사로 하고 여왕 직 그런 냠용 또바 냠용 여바인사 다데 디니기 유간지나 그 당번에 기부 ting이 그 발로전 때 기부 ting이 남기린 벌로 주제나 디고 그래서 그 기부 침별 남기린 바 ting이 남기린 바 녀바 가서 충의 남기린 바 녀를 자네 그런 게 연대디 그런 냠용 여대 바자 그 기부 ting이 남기린 바네 티네 롭션 제션 디고 와서 그 디고 제사디 가서 디고르데 가서 타마와시 있는 디고 말이지 타마사디데 가서 타마시라고 하는 김전디데 제사 가서 타마지라도 윤회 장만용화들 지고 윤회 장만용화들라 당보 충을 남기리 바디 투마 남기리 바 장주고래 디 장마주바 있나 아니 기부 딩글 남기리 바 장주바인데 계속 게마토체 충을 남기리 맞아 가야 기바 윤대 마기바 경하라고 그래서 제사 디네레스 제사 당보 그런 기부 충우다 투마 남기리 뭘로 장 사와지 있는데 그 기부 충을 남기리 뭘로 아니 당번에 아니 그 기부 딩다 투마 남기리 바 팔로 장진다 디고레스 그 또가 기투를 가서 기부 충을 남기리 바 녀를 장사로 와서
Someone who has previously, perhaps in a previous life, trained well in the practices shared with a practitioner of initial capacity, in this life then, because they have trained successfully and given rise to those good qualities within, they can start in the training shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity, again, because that foundation is there. They have trained well in the preliminaries, and then they're ready to move to the next level of the preliminaries. But what the term here of lesser being, this refers to someone who has not yet completed their training in the practices shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. They have to start there because those qualities haven't been developed in a sustained manner within. So just to be clear, a lesser being, this refers to a beginner. A beginner, not necessarily in terms of having met the Dharma, but a beginner in terms of the qualities developed within.
ngadi shanda chine zindu chuba tuen chan jang sayan chinde ngadi delile je ko lobda zuwene ko zindu chukchi de ya jang chocho digor ba inji meji ko de jemba chebe ne ya lamsa jensu yongura dine dine sada 보 사바 사냐지 기네 자모냐지 되는데 zen데 순반의 장이 람는데 갈라고 차고로 와서 zen데 당번의 장 공원전의 장과 차고로 와디로 순고로 와다 된다.
And similarly, if a child moves here with their family, moves to Australia with their family, if they're coming from a comparable education system, they can go from the same year from their former country to Australia and just join the new class, and there won't be any difficulty. But if they come from a very different education system, or perhaps no education system, they cannot just enter into the year, into the class in accordance with their age. It will not go well. They haven't developed the foundation. They would need to start at the beginning.
Gebana, Goma Tibe, Chobe, Rangle, Gasa Ranglamle, Yangba Meadows.
Lama Tsongkhapa continues. Moreover, so a further reason, moreover, some fortunate persons with higher capacity who have been taught the common path and already trained in it, whether in this life or in a previous one, will quickly develop excellent qualities. Having developed the lower ones, there's a missing word, having developed the lower ones sequentially, they can easily be guided through the higher levels progressively. Thus, their path will not be prolonged. So I'll just read that last bit again because there are two words missed. there's the same word, I've translated it differently. Having developed the lower ones sequentially, they can easily be guided through the higher levels progressively. Thus, their path will not be prolonged.
튕기 여바 디사시고로 공매 가와 젠서 디네게 자와이나 장 투여기 코로나 뉴바 디네게 에 튕긴 여대 바디라 공매 가와 젠서 벤 타바침 비슈냠네 지야기 코로나야 튕긴다 디네게 되면요 듬바 여바다 디네게 가와 여대 지제 하나 아니 타바 코르 동아를 타바 토비하게 삼바 가서 토비하게 되요 듬바 여대려야 안 진냠네 지기 듬바 여대 바다 디네시나 공매 가와 젠식으로 바다 데네게다 지게 냠네 지게 되녀기 듬바다 데네게 되면나 공매가와지 말와 냠네 지게 고가와 고합들에게 말하고 그 되가면 바른시나.
Moreover, some fortunate persons with higher capacity who have been taught the common path and already trained in it. So this fortunate persons here of higher capacity. So higher capacity refers to they've developed qualities, which means that they are of higher capacity. What are those qualities? What are those qualities that mark them out to be fortunate? So fortunate in this context, not how the word is used elsewhere, but fortunate in this context is someone who has already, in dependence on prior training, developed a deep and stable determination to attain either liberation or enlightenment. So that is the kind of fortunate person, a person of higher qualities, higher capacity that is referred to here. Such a person is ready for the actual Mahayana.
중원의 투모람 이름바데 데네 딩게람 이름바데 두스템바이나 투모 데네게 장여주 나르게 심바 마예야 뮤르도 연텐데 깨와 주로시데 제사 데네게 나 게세바네 되스 마장나 람사 지고 잔서 태야다 안지고 뉴발 마선의 슈처줘야 나 마게바 데네게 기부 중원의 투모람 이름바 장제 기부 딩게람 이름바 나 마게바 지나 데네게 냠는 체류 안 기부 딩게람 이름 기부 중원람 이름바 로 자유 슈게 기부 딩게람 이름바 되게 교화기도 뉴르도 교화기도 그래 지난 기부 딩이 투모람 이름 로 자유도 디장배 뜻이 기부 침별람 이름바데 뉴르도 안 기도 그래 지자디 연된 된수요레스 지자 연된 데다 개와 규르에 네 뉴르도 연된 데다 개와 규르에스데 연 똑바디게 공도스 공바기게 해서 그래.
So moreover, some fortunate persons with higher capacity, so hopefully that's clear, who is considered in this context to be a fortunate person with higher capacity, is someone who, in dependence on prior training, already has a deep and abiding determination for liberation or enlightenment. So such a person who have been taught the common path, so the trainings of a practitioner of initial and intermediate capacity, and already trained in it, whether in this life or in a previous one, will quickly develop excellent qualities. So what this last bit is meaning, will quickly develop excellent qualities. So a person who now comes to the Dharma, comes to the Mahayana Dharma, with already a person of a fortunate person with higher capacity, they should still train in the practices that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. So starting again at the beginning, but because they are a fortunate person with high capacity, they'll quickly give rise to those qualities and will then be led into the trainings which are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. So again, these are things they've trained in properly in past lives. So now, very quickly, they'll give rise to those qualities. So the further key point being made here is even someone who has trained well in past lives will still, in this life, will engage in the cultivation of the preliminaries. It's just that they'll progress through them very quickly.
So Gomar, Tibe, Chobe, Ranglamla, Yamba me, Sidi, Oma, Oma Dangbodi, Oma di, Kibu Chung, Tuma Lamiriba, Lojan, the Kabla Karchigos, Karchangos, and Mansota, Mansung, Yawa, Ida, Dundugu, Dungadi, Samda, Dele, Targo to Sabi, Dungadi, some Tardo, Sabakine, Ye, Dirwa, Dicha, did a Omate. Di Oma, Dele, Comadida, Oma, Dene, Kibu Tingi, Kore, Dangasung, Dunga, Tardo, Sabakine, Kore, Dunga, Dicha, Dirwa. Jisa Dicha, Garchigos, Jisangasung, Dunga, Gun Tongache, Dele, Tardo, Sabayakuchi, Yakuchi, Nisu, Dangasung, Dunga, Ganga Teda, Dunga, the Yakucha, Hako, Dele, Tardo, Samba Shuchimu, Yobaina, Dene, that Yoba Digalia, and that. Immediately given a Hali given a Dunga Yorwas, Dunga Toya Yorwa, Toya Lamsa, Digida, Shuki, and Mida, Hali given a Gangadi do Gangadilla, Targo to Sambeda, Kangatilla, Kuri Dunga, Tadale, Targo to Sambi, Tardu Sambaki, Lava Chagorwa, Chisa Oma Giabana, the Neki, Goma Tibe, Chisa, Goma Komala, and Gedi, Lela, Res Goma Comet. Chisan Kibu Chung, Lamirabo, Loyabo, Chang, Diabo Chang, Kibu Dingy Lamir Boje, Loyaki, Yamlendi, Yohaki to go. Chisan the Kibu Dingy Lamir Lochan, then Simjan Tamjel and Mibigi, Kibu Chimbe Lamir Lochan, and Yohachan to go. Chibe, Chobedine, Ranglam La, Ranglam Le, Yang Bame, Sidachisa, Kibu Chung, Tumo Lamir Bajaje. Jane, Kibu Jingi Lamirimba, Liapa, Jupe, Dusu Corne, Barsi Marella, Kibu, Chesan Yoaki to Remado Digi, Kibu Jingi Lamirimba Kiala, Pa Yang Dusu Yang Mares. Chesan Dini, Dinashin, Kibu Chunga Lamirimba, Locha, Jingurimba, Locha, Tabachimbo, Yamen Chevala, Yoaki Romada Digi, Dusu Martin, Yang Mares, Yama made us.
Having developed the lower ones sequentially. So the lower ones here then refers to, so this is still staying with the practitioner, what do we have here? This fortunate person with higher capacity. So they, having developed the lower ones sequentially, and so in other words, already probably in past lives, has trained successfully in the training shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. So the lower ones refers to the practices shared with the practitioner of initial capacity and trained sequentially, so in the correct sequence, having come to recognize and reflect on impermanence, the suffering of the lower realms, and so forth. Having trained well there and independence on that training, they then focus their attention on the second part of the preliminaries, those of a practitioner, those shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. They can easily be guided through the higher levels progressively. So the higher levels here refers to initially that their basis is of the actually let me check this.
Goma City, Kibu Goma Sine, Kibu Chunga Lamirimbalo, Goma de Kibu Dingy Lamiribarua, Kibu Dingy Lamirimbalo, Goma de Kibu Chembe Lamiribarua.
Yeah, so let me just, where was I? So they can easily be guided through the higher levels progressively. So if they have, this fortunate person just has the foundation from past lives of having trained well in the training shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, they'll quickly progress. They will be ready to progress through the trainings of a practitioner of intermediate capacity. But if they have also trained successfully in that in past lives, by re-engaging in these preliminaries in this life, they will quickly show the fruits of their past training. Their previous good qualities will readily blossom in this life. Therefore, the final sentence, thus their path will not be prolonged. So this is then the final key point being made here, is that even a fortunate person who has high capacity because of their successful training in past lives, by re-engaging once again in the preliminaries in this life, they will not be wasting their time. There will be no obstacle. It will actually speed up their development because their past qualities will be nurtured and thereby blossom within.
양아제래 양아제 태바침비기 최년면 제기 등이 듬보여 간지 지마다 양아제 체델야다 태바침비 최장이 냠네 제 고조바이나 당보 요마 기부충 투모알람이를 받아 로장바이나 델라니레 라디 요가든 기부팅다 투모알람이로 로장디 야부 요가기 두레스 디 안기부팅다 투모알람이를 받디니디 로야부 장요디 된 기부침비 고마 디 고마 기부 침별람이를 받아 로디 냠네디 야고 교할래도 그래서 그래. 니 두스네 당번에 바 냠네 지리가 기부 충무다 투말람이 로장 되는 징결람이 로장 되는 디 고마다 고마스리 기부 침별람이 로장이데 두스네 리바지 잡아는 요가장 요갈래 장냠네 지도 그래라래. 세상에 디 기부 된 태바침에 취 냠네 지 되바 여바치 기부 충무다 투말람이 로마자 징결람이 로마자 태바침에 취람이 태바침비 람 냠네 제게 장돼 봐네 되네 게 하고래 계속 말 갖고 말해서 제자디 갖고래 해서 그래.
What we're seeing here then is, before one has as one's main focus in one's trainings the meditations associated with the Mahayana, it's imperative to have trained successfully in the preliminaries. And if in past lives, to the extent that one in past lives has trained properly or correctly, one's training in this life will come about swiftly. So dependent on the imprints we bring into this life, and in this life again, we train in the way that's guided by focusing first on the preliminaries of those practices shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, and when these are well developed within, however long that may take, then shifting our focus to the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. And then only when those have been fully developed within, however long that may take, then are we ready to engage with a focus on the trainings of the Mahayana. If we, rather than engage in the preliminaries, we just follow our desires and we place our focus on what draws us, nothing much will come, no matter how long we try.
강박 지를 줘도 견제 강라야 견제 강라 조고고나 제사 당보 견제 당보 니버 숨바들이야 강보 마저지 시번가 발이야 강보 자야게 삼다 되베네 델야는 간스자오라 간소세 데 만nhập 강아지 뒤스 망고고로 안지 에디 강보nhập 저 투에 갈라고 차고로 딜레게 코 당보하는 견제 당보네 파델레 공부도 두스 좋아하는 교관이 돼서 그래 디나신 당아도 차바침비 최제게 고급이게 되네 돈이 dumbo여 흔들라 차바침에 최저와 선반다 당보 기부 충분 남이름 발파 투모람이름 발로장 되네 기부 딩다 투모람이름 로장 되네 기부 침별람이름 로장에도 고 두스치는 장용나 아니 찍디 약고 차는 되네 오마디게 강마디 냠는 제발라 핑거레 파도 핑거레 대도시는 자 기부 충별람이름 바디 로장에도 기부 딩게람이름 로장에도 교화돼 두고래 나 기부 딩게람이름 로장 사회지네 기부 침별람이름 로장에도 교화를 지루고래 그래서 도시는 자만 교화용도 그래서 제자 되네 인자 견지 당보 당니발 강마마게 숨바 시바들 강바자 잡는데 빼진 예 뒤수에 마보고야 아니 되네 강보야 내 마토와 되네 야자투 말레스 디나시 기부 충다 투모람이르바 딩이람로 주네 마자마제 기부 침비길로 냠는 지위랍네 디 냠는 데 용토 말해서 그렇다 단단히 뭐지 숨어래.
So in essence, or we can take an analogy here. If one wants to go upstairs, one knows one needs to go in the particular sequence there as the only way to get to the top. So too with our training. We have to first engage in the preliminaries before we can engage successfully in the actual practice. If we try to engage in the actual practice without having done the preliminaries to the required level, nothing much will come. So we therefore need to train with our focus being on our actual level. So we put our focus in our meditations are on our actual level, but we do so with the goal of the Mahayana in mind. So we start with where we are. At the trainings for a practitioner of initial capacity, that's our focus, but we have the goal of the Mahayana in mind. And when we've trained well in the practices of initial being, and we've given rise to those qualities, then we shift our focus to the practices shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, with the goal of the Mahayana in mind. So this is just like the analogy of climbing the stairs. One goes up the stairs in the correct sequence, one stair after the other, but the whole time you have in mind that you want to reach the top of the stairway. So you have your mind on the top of the stairway, but you climb one step after the other to reach it.
진바다 추진도 쇠바도 준주의 냠는 지거로와 제가 다디 냠는 진바도 추진도 쇠베게 준주의 냠는 약호실 장여도 냠는 장여도 는 디오 제려야 기부 진다 투모라미 러자도 되네 믹스게 깔레 장모하지 진바도 추진 쇠바 준주의 냠는 디게 믹스게 깔레 장모하지 레라데 됐고 다델레 슈께서 조디다 가소리 만성의 코에 동아 타들 주변 녀모비 녀부 대야게 다음에 봐도 봐다 띵에지 신에다 다음에 봐도 숙제 장고 장장고 가버려 진바 수준서 봐야 샤라샤 삼 장고 말고 가스니네 장차대로 봐 다깔에 마자디 띵에지 신에 고면다 다음에 봐도 비셔니라 깔래 야고 봐 기부 중요한 이름 gün에 마장 와지나 신에다 주림다 쇠바다 전주의 삼대 띵에지나 샤라 차사 장고야 차고라 망부 고구도 와 제가 언도스네 기부 충분히 투모람 이름 로자부 장사와이나 기부 증리야라 장여도 되네 반냠는 제도가블라 되네 조 숙제야데 되네게 가서 딩에지나 사바장과데 딩에진 신의 주변의 사바자에 다음에 봐도 비셔라 사바자야마도 현대의 사바장고 말하고 냐만의 장사 냠명여들로 와 디나신 기부 증다 투모람 이름 로장여도 신이 가서 진바 수련서가 전에 샘대 시럽 차상로 전거로와 다야는 태바치 병염의 지도가라 다 가르고서는 단인지에다 장수샘다 딜을 조슈게마도 다음에 봐 동방이 또 받아 제속에 믹스기 대자시고 가 사바나 이슈 장국문도 와대 제가 배 둠들 레라 차고 와대 제가 내내서 오원 마장주도 시대 둠대 두고래 레라 두고래 세 둠지 금제 되네래도
So we've been looking at this topic for quite a while, so it'll be very clear to you what the goals are of each stage of training. So the goal of a practitioner of initial capacity is to ensure good rebirth. The goal of a practitioner of intermediate capacity is liberation, and the goal of a practitioner of great capacity is enlightenment. And again, what should be very clear after having looked at this for so long is that these first two stages are the preliminaries for the third. And we've seen here in detail the reasons why it's imperative one trains in this way to bring about the desired goal. If one trains out of sequence without having developed the required foundation, nothing much will come, no matter how many years one tries. And now to present this from in another way, from a different perspective. As you know, the practitioner of initial capacity, as you know, the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity are the four: ethical restraint, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance. And you'll know that those same four are also shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, and they are practices included within the practices are unique to practitioner of great capacity. These 4 are found at all 3 levels. So when someone trains in the way they're guided, starting with their preliminaries, they will be meditating on ethical restraint, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance in order to ensure they attain good rebirths so that they eventually can attain enlightenment. So they have the final goal in mind, but they are now striving for a good rebirth. They're meditating on those 4 practices. And when they give rise to the qualities of a practitioner of initial capacity, they will then be ready to now focus on the trainings of a practitioner of intermediate capacity. And they will engage in these new practices now, but with the same goal in mind, that of eventual enlightenment for the sake of all beings, but they'll be meditating on the practices of a practitioner of intermediate capacity, and they will have their foundation already built on the practitioner of initial capacity. So they will have a mind very focused, no longer drawn to the pleasures of this life and the problems of this life, but focused on now looking at the sufferings of the higher realms and so forth. And what are the practices associated with the practitioner now of intermediate capacity, that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity? Again, ethical restraint, again, generosity, again, patience, again, joyous perseverance, but now also concentration and wisdom, or selflessness. Now this practitioner who has actually developed their preliminaries, in other words, the trainings of the practitioner of initial capacity, they will meditate on those shared 4, ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance, but they're deeply familiar with them, so they will not be their focus. Their focus will be concentration and selflessness. But if they're not meditating in the way that's guided, and they've skipped these preliminaries, they will have to meditate on ethics to subdue the mind sufficiently, as well as generosity to cultivate virtue, and patience to deal with the hardships, and joyous perseverance to eventually be able to actually have some success in concentration and wisdom. So they will be struggling here. Whereas a practitioner who has put the time and energy in training in the practices of a practitioner of initial capacity, when they come to the now being qualified to engage in the practices shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, those first 4 of ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance, they already have deep familiarity. They'll still meditate on them, but it won't be a focus. Their focus will be concentration and wisdom. And when that practitioner has given rise to the qualities of a practitioner of intermediate capacity, and they've given rise to the signs of having been successful in this path, they will then be ready to engage in the practices of a practitioner of great capacity, because they've done all their preliminaries. And we know the practices of a practitioner of great capacity are, again, ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, wisdom, and those associated with bodhicitta. Those 6, they already have deep familiarity with. So they'll still meditate on them, but it won't be the focus. They'll still meditate on ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. But their focus will be on the new practices, those of love and compassion and bodhicitta. So in this way, this practitioner will move quickly through the stages because they have developed the required preliminaries in their requisite sequence.
다른 인보디 먼저 가르송고라서네 당한 저기 기부 충회라 미림바다 투모라 미림바 기부 진다 투모라 기부 침벨라 기부 침벨라 미림바 시도당 알아서 삼다도 기부 침벨라 미림바디 빼 마세직 다디 야가 레레 들어와다 오네 초도 교바이 빼 약셔디레 다디 장선 저기 다 기부 충회라 미림바다 제데 파 충충을 낭청을 다제 안도스 말로 좀 마제바제 안도스네 기부 침배 람이름 발로 잡아는 디디고 말데 기부 침배 람이름 냠는 기투 말에스 아니 디게 마도는 기부 중요한 람이 투모 람이름 바데야 냠는 맞게 바제디 냠는 가야며 바 차도 그래스 제산 되네 말에스 제산 당번에 거파 기부 침배 람이름 발로 장야기 돈이 좀 바쳐받치면 취 냠는 지게 돈이 좀 바이나 당번에 파 기부 중요다 투모 람이름 바데 발로 장 되네 좀기 투모 람이름 바도 로장 도시네 되네 기부 침배 람이름 로장 거래스 디장반에 요가라 람 냠는 귤레디 곧 파드림 바름 받친 바지 야 레고 땜바당 야 지금 그래서 나닝보다 냠는 지기 림바디 두스토 그래서 난 두슨 거다.
The essence then of what we've looked at is that, well, all of us are drawn to the Mahayana. We have these karmic imprints that the Mahayana entices us, draws us in. But there is therefore quite a likelihood we'll look down on the lesser practices, the lower practices, and rather follow our disposition, follow to what attracts us, and thereby think, I understand the others, and that is sufficient. I have an intellectual understanding of the others, that's sufficient. I'm rather going to put my time and my energy into what draws me. And this approach will not lead to the mind radically changing, will not lead to the kind of qualities arising that we yearn for. Still, imprints are attained, but in this life, one's mind will not change. To bring about change, now, for what remains of this life, we need to apply ourselves to train in the correct sequence, always holding the goal of the Mahayana, but training where we are, and train in the correct sequence. So thank you. Then we'll conclude there tonight and continue tomorrow. Thank you. But we'll take one question first, Cameron. Thanks.
Is an implication of this that if a being has not attained definite emergence, then they should not attempt to practice virtue?
So if a practitioner, if a being has not developed definite emergence, they should not attempt bodhicitta. Okay.
탑시 맞에도 말와다 지게 탑시도 제고로와 이나다 만송가 내중 코로에 나선 내중 섬의 윤회 마다게 제 심장 상요고가 토버쇼 자주 심자자 디콤되네 지금 말해라래 진짜 당한 중에 내중 기여 말때 many 기부 충분다 중요다 투모와 남기를 받아 로 장기래야 야지 잡아침베게 자주 상요고가 토버쇼 자주 심 두스냠네 제 연구로와 마다다디 가르송고서는 기부 충분다 투모와 남기를 봐 윤회로 마장와 기부 진다 투모 마임베 투모 남기를 로 윤회 마장와제 기부 침베 남 장자 삼다되네 디 또바기 통 말해서 그래서 내가 저기 다들 내가 저 디게 말에 기부 침베 남기를 냠는 자요 말은 디 말이고 아주 기부 중요다 투모 베네 기부 교화진 가서 동안 타고 원도고 토고 선배 삼르시다 되네 아니 지금 고외 동안 타달래 타고도 하지 마산 지금도 선배 삼르시다 되나 지금 마연 심지어 탐지 고외 동안을 잘 삼 타고도 하지는 심지어 탐지기도 나 산지고 토고도 두 섬다데 디티고로 와다.
So in brief, yes, both yes and no. And it works like this. So there's the sequence of trainings through I won't mention them all, but you're going through the parts of initial and then the parts of intermediate and then the great capacities. So this is clear. And these, all of them, one can include in a meditation. The focus should be where you are. So the bulk of your time and your energy and your effort is at whatever level you are. And there's only benefits that at whatever level we are now, to meditate on the great scope. But if that's our focus, it will not come about. It will only come about if the previous stages come. Likewise, if we focus on the intermediate scope, but we haven't developed the initial scope, it will not come about. So we can and should meditate on all of it so that we've got the overall picture. But the focus should be where we are. The majority of our time and our efforts in the session and what we keep in mind around the day, what we're trying to develop, should be where we are, so that first level.